In the early 1960s, Africa was a cauldron for independence. From Bissau to Bujumbura, liberators and Pan-Africanists geared up for the fight of their lives. But it wasn't just the colonialists that they had to look out for. This is African Roots, where we discover how individuals from across Africa have shaped the continent. I'm Leila Johnson Salami.
And I'm Kai Nebe.
Kai, can you name all of the Guineas in the world?
You mean the countries, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, in Africa, there's obviously a country called Guinea. And I guess there's Guinea-Bissau. There's Equatorial Guinea.
Impressive, but you are missing one. And technically 3.
Where? Surely not in Africa.
Well, there's Papua New Guinea. And in South America, there's French Guiana and Guyana. So yeah, not Africa, but yeah.
Oh, come on. At least I got the African ones. But why do you ask? What's your interest in Guineas?
Well, I want to talk about the liberation leader of Guinea-Bissau. Amilcar Cabral. Which was once a Portuguese colony in West Africa called Portuguese Guinea.
I see what you did there. Okay.
So actually, the first thing to know is that Amilcar Cabral was not just involved in the independence movement of his own country, but 3 African countries, which I will get to later on.
Okay, so we're talking about Amilcar Cabral.
Yeah. Cabral was born in Guinea-Bissau in 1924, but he moved with his parents as a young child to Cape Verde. Cape Verde has an interesting history on its own. Did you know that the islands in the Atlantic Ocean were actually uninhabited until Portuguese settlers arrived?
Well, I sure know now, but yeah, that's cool.
So Cabral completed his schooling there, and he was quite a bright fellow. In fact, in 1945, he apparently won a scholarship to attend university in Portugal.
So this was like going to the mother country, right?
Yeah, but as you know, Portugal had a number of other colonies in Africa: Angola, Mozambique, the islands of Sao Tome and Principe. And many young people from there traveled to Portugal for further education or even in search of jobs. So once in Portugal, Cabral befriends other Africans who believe their people should lead their respective nations to independence from Portugal. The Portuguese Empire, by this stage, was really flagging.
So Cabral goes to Portugal for studies, but ends up getting a degree in revolution, or what?
Well, no, I mean, at first, Cabral returned to Guinea-Bissau, not Cape Verde, mind you, with a qualification in agriculture, and worked as an agronomist for the Portuguese colonial authorities. And this is where I would say his real ideas were formed. See, Guinea-Bissau was a very poor country, and ordinary people lived in dire poverty with very little way out, not even opportunities for basic education. Guinea-Bissau journalist Tony Checa says Cabral wanted citizens of Guinea-Bissau to have the chance to learn.
Sabendo que Guiné-Bissau tinha esse déficit do conhecimento porque
Guinea-Bissau had a lack of education. They didn't even have a single high school, compared to Cape Verde, which had one of the best high schools in all of the Portuguese colonies. Cabral wanted to unite the learning of Cape Verdeans with the fighting spirit of those from Guinea.
A força, a decisão, a combatividade do homem guineense ao fator conhecimento que já existia em Cabo Verde.
Like many young leaders seeking liberation from Western colonialism, Cabral looked to the Eastern Bloc or socialist nations for support, or at least as an alternative to the exploitative colonialism Guinea-Bissau had been under. And he wasn't one for half measures.
Okay, in what way?
Well, I think Cabral saw himself as a product of both Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, where he grew up. So he agitated for independence in both colonies and was one of the founders of the African Party for the independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. And the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola in Southern Africa, with Angolan nationalist Agostinho Neto, who he met in Portugal.
What? So that's like He set up 2 independence movements.
Yeah. Cabral's writings spread beyond the country, becoming a source of inspiration for other African independence movements. For Sonia Borges, a Portuguese historian with Cape Verdean ancestry, Cabral's vision and understanding of each colony's unique conditions made his revolutionary theories so accessible.
Internationalism and international solidarity were always very important for Amilcar Cabral, and the fact that he thought of liberation struggles as a collective process, each one with its own specific national characteristics, made him a reference in several contexts.
There was a key turning point for Cabral, one which convinced him that it might take more than peaceful talks to gain independence from Portugal. Sikai, Portugal was under a dictatorship known as the Estado Novo and had a policy of keeping its overseas possessions. This was out of step with other colonial powers like Britain and France, who had accepted that colonies in Africa were untenable.
That took them a while as well. But what happened?
So, Portuguese police fired at protesting dock workers in the capital of Guinea-Bissau in 1959. Killing about 50 workers and wounding hundreds of others. This incident became known as the Pijiguiti massacre.
Wow, but then why was this an important date if the regime was already known for its brutality?
Well, it's believed that this was the final straw, let's say, that convinced Cabral's party to abandon the non-violent struggle and actually start a guerrilla campaign, according to Guinean journalist Tony Checa.
Amilcar Cabral was a man of peace who was made to make war in order to achieve peace.
Under Cabral's leadership, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde began an armed fight against Portugal in 1963. It depended heavily on support such as military equipment and training from Cuba, China, and the Soviet Union.
So those were Eastern Bloc countries then?
Exactly. But it's important to note that Cabral didn't become a die-hard communist. In fact, he actually refused to assume ideologies of these countries. Instead, he wanted to rebuild a post-colonial Guinea-Bissau according to local needs and not foreign ideology. Checa says Cabral was known for saying this.
The only condition we impose in order to receive help is that you do not impose any conditions.
It was for this attitude that Cabral got a lot of respect among African leaders with his refusal to bow to anyone, even to his Eastern allies.
That's all fine and well, but how did that affect the armed revolution?
Militarily speaking, it was one of the more successful campaigns against European colonialism. Guinean fighters battled Portuguese conscripts and gradually took over the country until he was de facto leader of most of Guinea-Bissau. Not just that, though, Kai. The soldiers, as part of their training, were taught agricultural techniques, which they then passed on to the so-called peasants so that they could sustain themselves off the land that they conquered. This war lasted for 10 years, by the way, and in September 1973, Guinea became independent from Portugal.
Wow, that's still quite a long war.
It sure is. And that's 2 years before Cape Verde, Angola, and Mozambique, by the way, gained their independence. And Cabral's campaign also proved to army officers under the Portuguese dictatorship that fighting unwinnable colonial wars in Africa was hopeless. This actually partly led to the 1974 Carnation Revolution in Portugal, by the way, where the 40-year dictatorship was overthrown. You may have heard about this. This was a revolution that took place without a shot being fired.
Wow. And I now that you mentioned it, I think I do remember. It's the one where those famous pictures are of people putting flowers into the guns of the soldiers, right?
Exactly. And that's why it's called the Carnation Revolution. Civilians literally stuck carnation flowers into the gun barrels of Portuguese soldiers. And with Portugal returning to democracy, it meant the rapid withdrawal of colonial forces in Africa, leading to independence. Sadly, though, Amilcar Cabral never lived to see it.
Well, why not?
Well, unfortunately, he was murdered in January 1973. Portuguese agents or jealous rivals were suspected, but Cabral's murder was never actually solved.
But what a legacy and what an influence. I mean, He was basically involved in the liberation of 3 countries in Africa, Angola, Cape Verde, and his own Guinea-Bissau, but also his actions influenced a European revolution. That is, when you think of it like that, that's crazy.
Yes, I mean, Kai, Cabral is talked about in the same league as Frantz Fanon or Che Guevara when it comes to revolutionary theory. And his influence is not lost on young people either. Indira Mendes is a Cape Verdean singer, and I think she sums it up well.
Cabo Verde has a very beautiful landscape and everything, but unfortunately it hides a very painful colonial past. For sure, Cabral's legacy remains forever within all Cabo Verdeans, because what we are now is thanks to what he did in the past.
When we come back, we are heading to Burundi to meet a prince whose power lay in unifying a divided nation.
DW African Roots. Find new African Roots episodes on dw.com/African Roots, Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, Leila, what a story about Amilcar Cabral. Most people are content with fomenting just one revolution, but not 3.
Yeah, Kai, I mean, I did say Amilcar Cabral was quite something. I wonder what would have happened to Guinea-Bissau had he not been assassinated. Though I guess one could extrapolate that to other leaders as well that we've spoken about on African Roots. Sankara, Lumumba.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately though, Leila, I could add an extra name to that list. It's actually the person I'd like to talk about now. His name is Louis Rwagasore.
Louis Rwagasore. And where's he from?
He's from Burundi in Central East Africa. Now, Burundi is a tiny country sandwiched between Tanzania and the massive Democratic Republic of Congo. Well, on the map, it looks tiny, but it's actually roughly the same size as Belgium. Burundi, like the Democratic Republic of Congo to the west and its northern neighbor Rwanda, was also a Belgian colony. And our man Louis Rwagasore, who was born in 1934, grew up under Belgian colonial rule. However, Rwagasore was more allied to the Burundian monarchy because he was a prince.
Cool.
Yeah, so the Belgian colonial authorities tolerated the royal families in Burundi, so long as they ruled in the interests of Belgium. But for Prince Louis, the Rwagasore's family standing allowed him certain privileges.
Okay. What sorts of privileges are we speaking about?
Well, for one, he was able to go overseas and study in Belgium's capital, Brussels. And that's significant because it was there that he met other members of the African diaspora.
Sounds a bit familiar. Kind of like a story we were talking about a few minutes ago.
It's kind of strange because from standing in Europe, it was perhaps easier to see how colonialism subjugated not just Burundians, but also other Africans too.
So let's name it then. So that's like Amilcar Cabral, who studied in Portugal, yeah?
Well, that's what I would have thought, though it must be noted that Rwagasore wasn't so much known for his academic prowess, but more for his diplomatic skills. So in 1956, Louis Rwagasore came back to Bujumbura, the capital of Burundi, with a passion for economy, and was hired by the Belgian colonial authorities to work for them. See, it was actually advantageous for the Belgian government to have a Burundian prince on their books.
Of course it was.
But Rwagasore's initial moves did not go according to plan. Emile Moroha, a retired history professor at the University of Burundi, talks of how Rwagasore pushed to establish local cooperatives to encourage economic independence among farmers in Burundi.
Il avait la vision du Burundi indépendant.
He had a vision of an independent Burundi. He also had a vision for development, which is why he created the cooperatives. Because aside from coffee cultivation, Burundi was still a rural, undeveloped country, Rwagasore founded the cooperatives so that the Burundians could take part in the modern economy.
These
cooperatives unfortunately failed. Basically, they were banned by the administration because they did not tolerate even potential deviation from the colonial project. This actually turned out to be good for Rwagasore's image because the Belgians' move inadvertently cast him as an anti-colonialist leader. And with the winds of independence sweeping across Africa in the late 1950s, the son of the king found himself in a prominent position as Belgium prepared to leave the country in 1962.
Oh, wow. But Rwagasore himself, what position did he then gain?
In Burundi, Rwagasore was really seen as a hero for the country's independence movement. Boyi Atanase, a former high-ranking member of the UPRONA party, or the Union for National Progress, was 14 years old when he first met Rwagasore.
It was on November 13th, 1959. He was a handsome young man, very impressive, very charismatic. His charisma and his openness to the world enabled him to develop relationships with the greatest political leaders of the time, especially Julius Nyerere, Patrice Lumumba, and Kwame Nkrumah.
By 1961, after democratic elections, Rwagasore was voted prime minister. But Rwagasore never experienced an independent Burundi. Aged just 29, he was shot in the back and killed weeks after his UPRONA party won a landslide victory.
Oh my goodness. And just 29 as well.
Yes, he was very, very young, and it was a huge shock. And while initially the killer was arrested and later executed, many suspect Belgian involvement, or at least support for Rwagasore's killing. It has to be said the murder has never been fully solved.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but I would ask why, considering they were already on their way out.
Well, it's never been conclusively proven, but basically the Belgians feared Rwagasore would steer Burundi away from Belgium, even in a post-colonial world. Many Belgians could not believe that they would lose their overseas possessions, but also Rwagasore's charisma enabled him to unite people beyond village politics, class, or even tribal affinities. This was in direct opposition to Belgium's colonial-era doctrine of divide and rule. Professor Moroha stresses that Rwagasore's UPRONA party was a broad coalition, and it sought to avoid the violence already evident at the time in neighboring Rwanda.
Rwagasore was successful in this because Burundi gained its independence almost without tensions. His party, UPRONA, was equally the party of the Hutus, the party of the Tutsis, and the party of the Ganwas.
Sadly, Louis Rwagasore's vision of a peaceful transition failed. After his death, political rivalries and ethnic tensions exploded, and since independence, Burundi has never really achieved consistent peace. Yet Rwagasore's vision for a united Burundi is still admired today.
So here's to another unifying figure that was not to be, I guess, and another story that ended before it had begun.
Exactly, and a man of peace literally shot in the back, and another assassination that was only resolved on the surface. But here we are in the age of African independence. That, at least, I think, was a lasting achievement of Rwagasore.
Certainly. I would definitely say that would be something that he's remembered for. And, Cabral as well.
Yes, absolutely, Leila. Rwagasore remains something like Burundi's Patrice Lumumba, and dare I say, the symbol of a peaceful transition to independence.
That's where we'll have to leave things for today. African Roots is a cooperation between DW and the Gerda Henkel Foundation. Thanks to Comic Republic in Nigeria for the artwork, and a special thanks to our producers, Philip Zadner, and our voiceover artists as well. Contributions by Carla Fernandez and Tamara Vakanagel. I'm Leila Johnson Salami.
And I'm Kai Nebe.